Hello, my awesome students. All right, welcome to another math video. Today's lesson is on 3.4 or 3-4, and it's B. So it's kind of the second part of multiple step inequalities. But here's the difference. This is multiple step, and the big difference is variables on both sides of the inequality sign. Now that being said, there's going to be a lot of copying down. So copy down this title. I'm going to kind of move this down. And I made a little table. And I'm going to want you to copy down this table. You're going to need to give yourself, I don't know, about, after you write the problem, at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe 9 lines. So go ahead and write down this table. Make sure it says X on one side, and this is X on both sides. So I'm going to hit pause right now and copy this stuff down. Alright, so now that you have this table written down, I'm going to move this up just a little bit, and I'm going to expose our steps that we're going to take to actually solve both of these equations. Right, so I'm going to move this down, and again, it's quite a bit. I'm going to move my paper up, so just a little bit. And I'm going to actually move it up a lot, and let's see. All right, so I'll quickly read this just so you know what to write down. So step 1 is you look for parentheses. Step 2, like terms, but kind of remember it says same side. Step 3, look for variables on both sides. Step 4 is you want to get the variables together. Step 5 is get the constants, or that's the plain numbers, together. And that's usually done by adding or subtracting. And then isolate the variable. That's usually the last step where we do times or divide. So make sure to copy these down. Let me see if I can enlarge it just a little bit for you. I can, but I knock off the numbers. So just in case you need it, hit pause right there, copy it down. If this works for you, hit pause right now, copy this down. And then make sure that in the end, before we start going, that you have everything that you see right here all copied down, enough space. So make sure to do that right now. Alright, so now we're going to actually start solving these, and I want to first bring to your attention that right on this side we only have the X on one side. You see how you have the inequality sign and there's no X's over here? And over here though I have X on both sides. So I have my negative 4X and 3X, and I did the problem with the same numbers. So negative 4x plus 7 plus a 3x, but they're all on the same side. This one, the negative 4x and that 3x are separated by the inequality sign or the equal sign. So first step, as you can tell, is you look for parentheses. Well, there is none. So step 1 is done. Now this is where step 2 is our first difference. Like terms are on the same side. So right here is a like term. The negative 4x and the 3x. These are not like terms. There's no like terms here. So what you do with your like terms is we do not change their sign. Okay? So that's a huge thing. Do not change their signs. So I literally just combine them. Negative 4x plus 3x is a negative 1x. I didn't touch the 7, so I'm going to drop it down. And then I'm going to drop all this down. But again, when you have like terms, there's no changing of these guys' sign. No change. Right? No change. Now, for a second, so let's come over here then. If you have variables on both sides, well, you technically do not have like terms. So we're going to skip to number 3. Look for variables on both sides. And then step 4 is, yes, we do, get them together. This is when you have to change the sign. So here we go minus 3x. And remember, the only time we change signs is after we kind of make this little T chart, remember? And we're going over. So minus 3x. And you notice on this one I did not make this little diagram with the t. That's because I'm not changing signs on like terms. So I'm going to still drop down this plus 7, drop down my inequality sign, drop down this 28 over here. But this time, they cancel out. I add these up, and I get negative 7x. Do you see the difference between like terms and variables on both sides? It radically changes what we had. So now just going to go back to solving this. This is probably pretty easy for you. So we get the constants together, so get the numbers. That means the plain number. So again, now I'm moving this 7. So I go minus 7, and I get 13 minus 7 is 6. Drop down my negative 1x. And then I'm going to, again, divide. And this is isolating the variable. Remember, times are divide. So I'm going to divide by a negative 1. And remember, that's a warning, if you divide with a negative, if you're dividing with a negative, I got to take this sign and flip him around. So that becomes a negative 6. And my x is by itself or isolated. Okay, that's what I mean by isolate. It's by itself. Come back over here. Now they actually start to look the same. We're at step number 5. Get the consonants, the plain numbers together. So minus 7, and that's going to be 28 minus 7 is 21. This crosses out. The negative 7x falls down. And then, again, pretty much the same thing. Isolate the variable. Divide by negative 7. Divide by negative 7. And again, because I'm dividing with a negative 7, I have to turn this sign around. So it comes around, and those cross out. There's my x. And 21 divided by negative 7 is a negative 3. So the big point, though, is right here with the differences between like terms and variables on both sides. Variables on both sides, you have to use the chart and move it over. Like terms, there's no change in their numbers. You just add them up. So you gotta go negative 4 plus 3. So hit pause right now and make sure that you have all this copied down again. All right, so here's going to be our example 2. And this is going to be our equation. So if you need to, hit pause right now and copy this down. And this is how it reads, though. Negative 5, parentheses, 2x plus 7 plus x less than negative x minus 11. So again, make sure you have this copied down. I'll give you a second or two. All right, you have it copied down. So the next thing, all right, so step 1, look for parentheses. I found some. So what do? We distribute. We pass out that 5, okay? So there's my arrows. I go negative 5 times 2. That will give me a negative 10x. Negative 5 times 7 will give me a negative 35. Now I haven't touched anything else, so I'm just going to copy it down. Plus x less than negative x minus 11. Okay? So that was step 1. Step 2, look for like terms. Right? Now remember, like terms is the same variable on the same side. Well, let's see. I have an x right here and an x right there. Now I do have a third x, but he's not on the same side as these two. So this right here is a like term. He is a like term. Not a like term. He's not on the same side, right? So always remember, like terms have to be on the same side. So I'm going to drop down everything I'm not using. Now remember, in a calculator, you can always put a 1 in front of the x. So I am going to put a 1 right here. And just type in negative 10 plus 1, and you should get a negative 9x. All right, so the next line is negative 9x minus 35 is less than negative x minus 1. So now we look for variables on both sides. Well, now we do. We have a negative 9x and I have a negative x. So again, what's the difference? When they're on opposite sides of the inequality sign, we move one. So we're going to go plus x. And again, you can put a 1 in front of it. I'll do that over here. Plus 1x. It's the same thing. Drop down the negative 35. Drop down my inequality sign. Don't forget to drop down that negative 11 with its negative sign. And if you type in negative 9 plus 1, you should get a negative x. Right? At this point, it should be really easy for you guys. This is now a two-step equation. We get the constants or the plain numbers together. So I'm going to get rid of the 35 by going plus 35, plus 35. I'm going to drop down my inequality sign, the negative 8x. And this becomes, type in negative 11 plus 35 gives you a positive 24. And then I'm going to, step 5, isolate the variable with multiplication or division. Most of the time it will be division. So I'm dividing, but be warned, I'm dividing with a negative 8. So divide negative 8. So that means I take this sign, flip it around, and I'm going to get a negative 3 if I type that into my calculator. This crosses out, isolating the x, and I have x is greater than negative. Oops, kind of hard to see. X is greater than negative 3 because I switched my inequality sign around because I divided with a negative. So make sure that you hit pause and you have all this work copied down also. Alright, so here's our last example on this lesson, and it's a big one. So hit pause right now and copy this down. Okay, so now that you did this, step 1, we look for parentheses. Well, we have parentheses right here, right there. So I'm going to go through this one a little bit quicker. So I go negative 2 times 9 is negative 18y. Negative 2 times 3 is negative 6. I'm going to drop down my negative 7y, drop down my sign, drop down this negative 10y, and then I'm going to pause for a second because I do have a set of parentheses, but there's only a negative sign in front of it. So I'm going to put a 1 there, and then I'm going to multiply that. So that's a little tricky on this one. So I go negative 1 times 12 is going to make that a negative 12y. Negative 1 times a positive 9 makes it a negative 9. So we got rid of our parentheses. So step 2 is like terms. So we have a couple of like terms on this one. We have a negative 18y on this side and a negative 7y on this side. So I'm going to take care of those. And negative 18 plus a negative 7y will give me a negative 25y. And then I'm just going to drop down my minus 6. So I have that. Now, I look on the other side, and there's two y's over here. Well, because they're on the same side, they're like terms. So I'm going to go negative 10 plus negative 12, and that's going to give me a negative 22y. And then I didn't touch my minus 9, so he's there. So we had two sets of like terms, so that's why I just put lines under this side. All right, so again, we do have variables on opposite sides. So let's move it. Plus 22y. I'm going to move him over here. Plus 22y. Drop down everything I'm not using. Drop down the negative 6. Drop down the negative 9. Those cancel out. And over here, I get a nice and easy negative 3y because I typed in negative 25 plus 22. At this point, get your, it's a two-step equation. Go plus 6, plus 6. That's going to give me a negative 3. And my negative 3y falls down. And then my last step is isolate that variable with division. And we've had a lot of dividing with negative numbers today, so a lot of flipping. So the y falls down. Turn him around because I'm dividing with a negative 3. And negative 3 divided by negative 3 is a positive 1. So you have y is less than or equal to positive 1. Have a mathtastic day. See you.